The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has put Nigeria's economy under serious pressure, leaving authorities to scramble for more financial support. The West African country's debt level is projected at about $92 billion, and the government wants to borrow more to resuscitate the economy. But some economic experts did not welcome the move, saying the country's debt situation is becoming unsustainable. More of that in this report.
Nigeria has a serious cash crunch made worse by COVID-19 and low oil prices. The government has been borrowing massively to fund its budget. Despite the country's current debt level estimated at around $92 billion, the government wants to borrow more. It's increased its borrowing limit by raising the amount it is allowed to borrow as a proportion of its GDP from 25% to 40%. But some economic experts are against the idea.
There is almost a consensus at this time that our debt profile is already approaching a threshold that we cannot consider to be sustainable. If we look at the components of our resources, of our revenue, that we commit to debt service, it says sometimes close to 60%. If we look at the component of debt service in the budget compared to our capital allocation and other very vital budget heads, it's quite heavy. So, and we know that the capacity of the government to service debts is becoming increasingly challenging.
Nigeria is currently spending big to service its debts. In the third quarter of last year, the cost of debt servicing rose by 89%. Many fear racking up additional debts could worsen things for the country. But the government says the intended borrowing is only for the period of 2020 through 2023. It's also taking measures to shore up its revenues to ensure its obligations are met.
There's also a lot of improvement on our revenue generation. Even though we haven't gotten to where we want to be, but we have seen a steady increase in the revenue from 2018 to today, and we expect that trajectory to continue as we implement the strategic revenue and growth initiative.
Part of the new debt management strategy will also prioritize domestic borrowing over external loans. The government says it will focus more on long-term domestic instruments.
Perhaps that will make some sense, because in the last 1 or 2 years, it's looking as if it's becoming cheaper to borrow domestically than to borrow externally. If you look at the yield on treasury bills, on federal government bonds, these things are around 1%, 2%, 3% at best. So it's becoming cheaper to borrow domestically than to borrow externally. And generally, in terms of managing debt, it is often easier to manage debts that are in domestic currency than debts that are in foreign currency.
The new borrowings will most certainly drive up the size of Nigeria's debt, but the government insists the country's debt level is sustainable and still within global recommended threshold. It says without the new borrowings, it will be more than challenging for it to meet its financing needs and get the country on the path of growth.